What's up? Welcome back, everyone, to 8-Bit Generation X. I'm Eric, and I'm coming at you today with a popular question that I get a lot, either through various groups that I follow online or just, in everyday conversation. People always want to know who should have been WWE champion and never was. Coming from the early 80s all the way into the early 90s, the WWF champion or WWE champion always held the belt for a long period of time. Therefore, we didn't have that many champions, not like today, or even through the Attitude Era where the world title was like a hot potato. Everybody was just getting tossed around, everybody had a reign. And I have thoughts on that if it comes from that generation where everyone gets a trophy. But it seems like today's fans want everybody to have a turn being world champion, where back in the day, you had a couple guys that generally could be the champion and be the face of the company, the franchise player for extended period of time. Obviously, we had Hogan through the 80s, was champion majority of the time. Savage had a year run. Even like when the Warrior won it in 90, he only had it for till less than a year. And it seemed like a short reign at the time. Now, I feel like up until somewhat recently with Roman Reigns and maybe Brock Lesnar, people would average, the title reign would be maybe a couple months. That would be like a long reign, But they also didn't have monthly pay-per-views back then, so there was a little less content. So there's different reasons. But there are 5 names that constantly get brought up as the 5 people who should have held the title and never got a chance. Before I get into this list, please hit that subscribe button. Like, subscribe, share, all right? We'll get more content out like this to more people. All right, so I'm gonna break down 5 names that I most commonly associate, or even if I had to make the list, because I'm fine with how things played out. I think there was no other way you could do it during the Golden Era. But here are the 5 names that could have been WWE champion and never got the chance. I'm going to go from least to most deserving, let's say, or most likely. So first on my list, and most commonly said when I see these posts, these 4 men should have been champion. Jake the Snake Roberts, all right? He was a heel when he started with the company, but he hit his popularity, I'd say, in 87, 88, 89, even in 90. And I think that's where, if he was ever to be world champ, it would have been during his face run, because he was popular. During a Survivor Series, he could captain a team. He was always in a major feud with top guys. Andre the Giant, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. You could program him with Rick Martel and have him high up on the card. Jake was so popular, though, he really didn't need to chase championships. He never really was a challenger for the Intercontinental Championship. I guess you could argue when the Honky Tonk Man back in 87 was champ, he had a program with him. But he was never really a contender. But he was high up on the card. His popularity was undeniable. However, during that period of time, Hogan, as WWE champion, and this is going to be a common thing that I'm going to say throughout this video, Hogan had that belt on lockdown, and it's not because of politics. It's because he was the right person for the growth at the time of the company. Behind the scenes, all the extra promotional shows and promotional events that a champion has to do, Hogan did it and did it well. I do not know if Jake the Snake Roberts would have had that mass appeal as Hulk Hogan did. Also, Jake had a history of alcohol and drug abuse, and maybe he was a little less reliable than we knew as kids. The merchandising, that might have flew if you put the WWE merchandise machine behind Jake with with the snakes, and I bet I can see a whole bunch of merchandise for Jake Roberts. So I just never saw a feud where they would have had to take the belt off Hogan, give it to a heel, and then have Jake as a face defeat that heel. Maybe if Savage somehow won after WrestleMania 5, you could have done a Jake versus Savage feud where Jake wins the title at SummerSlam 89 or something like that. But Hogan winning at WrestleMania 5 with the Mega Powers exploding, they put a year and a half into that program. So that was Jake's window. He did have a decent chance in 1992 as a heel to be WCW champion. I could remember that, and I could picture him beating Sting at the time for the WCW title. But again, I think his personal demons and he got in the way, therefore that never happened. But Jake Roberts' best chance for a world title would have been the WCW title around 92. All right, the next name I always hear, Ravishing Rick Rude. Ravishing Rick Rude should have been WWE champion at some point. Now, the WWE, especially during the early, into the 80s, into the 90s, and even before, they never really had heel champions. If they did, they were transitional champions. This could have worked. I believe once the Warrior had the title after WrestleMania 6, and Rude had that championship match at, let's call it, SummerSlam 90 in the steel cage. Maybe that would have been Rick Rude's opportunity to be world champ because they realized then it wasn't working with Warrior. I think they were giving it a little longer. If maybe back then, if there were more pay-per-views per year and they didn't go from WrestleMania all the way to SummerSlam, if there was some in-betweens, maybe Rick Rude could have got a victory over the Ultimate Warrior and actually became champion. And just to lose it back to Warrior, I could actually see that. I could see Heenan going crazy about having the champion, managing his first world champion. Rick Rude had that history of beating the Warrior because he beat him at WrestleMania 5 for the IC belt. So that could have happened. I believe it didn't for a couple reasons. One, they wanted to keep it going with the Warrior just to see if it would catch on fire. Also, contracts with Rick Rude back then weren't going well. Shortly after SummerSlam 90, he was gone from the company and popped up in WCW not too much longer after that. So that would have been Rick Rude's window. Again, back then, the championship belt and reigns meant more. So you didn't want to have short reigns. It starts making devalues the belt. Now, a lot of people say the belt's just a gimmick, it's just a prop. But if you talk to people from my generation, or even how you felt when Roman Reigns was constantly winning his title matches and having long reigns, title matches felt special. Really, when you see him now during the Attitude Era and during the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you're seeing championships change hands on Raw. They just didn't feel as special. So anyway, Rick Rude could have been champ maybe in the summer of 90. Again, heel champions in the WWE at the time. Wasn't something you saw too often. All right, number 3 on the list, Roddy Piper. All right, the Hot Rod. He could have been champ maybe at 2 different points in his career. And both of them have good reasons why it never happened. No one was a hotter heel in the mid-'80s than Roddy Piper. He was hated, and that is a perfect time to put the belt on a heel. He is so hated, but again, I do not think they were going to interrupt Hogan's reign. maybe if you could rewrite history, Piper could have maybe beat Hogan prior to the original WrestleMania, and then you had Hogan win the belt back at WrestleMania 1, and instead of having it a tag match with Mr. T, it was just Mr. T in his corner. That actually could have worked, right? But I don't see the company taking the belt off Hogan in the middle of that original Hulkamania run. Also, Piper could have been a transitional champion around 1992. If you remember, that's when, say, Ric Flair wins the 92 Royal Rumble and becomes WWF champion. The company was in a bit of transition. They didn't quite know where they were going. Maybe it had to do with the steroid scandal. Maybe it had to do with expiring contracts. But 92 was kind of a mess. So Flair's the champ. They were originally going to put Hogan, Flair together at WrestleMania 8, but then I guess that wasn't working on house shows, and they felt it wasn't good for a WrestleMania main event. Instead, they put Savage in with Flair and did a whole Elizabeth in the middle of Flair and Savage. Maybe they could have somehow figured a way to put Piper in that WrestleMania 8 spot and give Piper the win, because Savage dropped it back to Flair just a month or so later anyway. And Piper was hot enough. People might not have seen it coming. They might have just assumed Flair would win that one, and it would have been a big surprise. Yes, and I know at that time Piper was the IC champion, but they could have, who knows? They could have made him a double champ. They could have had Flair screw him out of the IC title earlier, prior to WrestleMania, and that kind of sparked the match, the feud of that one. And I mean, that tension between Flair and Piper, that was from the second Flair came on WWE TV in 91, Piper was on him. So that feud had some teeth, it had some mileage. Piper could have been a short-term champion, maybe WrestleMania 92, before the belt was put on Bret Hart, and then that train went off. So Piper, you had two chances to be champion. However, the way things played out, I really don't see any other way. All right, now we're getting into the people that I think really could have had an opportunity if they were given the belt. Next, Ted DiBiase, $1 Million Man. All right, the $1 Million Man, some will argue, actually was the champ. But prior, at the main event, 1988, when Andre surrendered the title to the $1 Million Man, it didn't count. Yes, he did have some appearances wearing the belt, most notably at the Boston Garden, where him and maybe he went one-on-one with Bam Bam Bigelow, and I think he had some tag matches, Hogan and Bigelow versus DiBiase and Andre, where he made some appearances and even was introduced as the WWF champion. But that was not recognized, that was not a legit win, so DiBiase was never champion. However, this is when he could have been champ. He could have won WrestleMania 4, right? And then you could kind of have programmed him with Savage, and maybe Savage wins down the line, because heel champions during this time weren't designed to carry the belt long term. So DiBiase could have won, and maybe at a Saturday night's main event, Savage wins with the help of Hogan, and that whole Mega Power storyline develops just a little later. But I could have bought DiBiase as a heel champion. He had the stroke, he had the heat, he had the character, he had the promos. There was another chance maybe with DiBiase back again, maybe in that whole murky area of 93 when his career was winding down, and there was that whole WrestleMania 9 time period where, maybe before Yokozuna with a feud with Bret Hart. But I don't know. That wouldn't have worked, I don't think. I think his best shot was in 89, right on the heels of WrestleMania 4, if not winning the belt at WrestleMania 4. Now, the most likely person who should have been the WWE or WWF champion that never got their opportunity was Mr. Perfect, right? This could have worked, and I kind of have an idea of when it could have worked. Mr. Perfect had the whole package. He could wrestle you, he could brawl you, he had the promo, he had the arrogance. Everyone hated him, but you believed he could beat anybody. He had that perfect winning streak for years. So he had us all believing he could beat anyone. So maybe if they wanted to, right after Survivor Series 89, maybe that was the opportunity to put the belt on Mr. Perfect. Again, maybe even at the Royal Rumble 1990, because back then, having the WWE champion in the Royal Rumble just didn't make sense. It had nothing to gain. Hogan won back-to-back years as champion. No stakes. It would have been much better to have the champion defend the belt at that pay-per-view, to add to that pay-per-view, add to that event, make it more of a spectacle. So you had the Royal Rumble. And even if the winner didn't get a title shot, because that didn't come till 92 or even 93, at least there was prestige, or maybe that person's the number one contender afterwards, even though he's not guaranteed the match at WrestleMania. Or they, put some money on the line, say, the winner of this gets $100,000. We would have bought that back then. But to have a main event Hogan, Perfect, and had Perfect somehow win the title at Royal Rumble, or maybe Hogan won it because he had lost it a month earlier. That would have been awesome. But Perfect could have held the title. And I could picture him with the Genius dancing around with the title belt and the crowd going crazy. But the stars would have aligned for Perfect in, I'd say, 89 into 90. That was his window. But again, I'm not upset about it because it wouldn't have made sense, because again, back then, when a face especially had the championship, it was almost assumed that that title reign was going to go at least a year. And if it went shorter than a year, we were scratching our heads being like, that was weird. So Perfect, you were a perfect Intercontinental Champion, and everything played out the way it should have. But those were the 5 wrestlers from the Golden Era that could have been WWE champion. Now, a little bonus. Who now in the WWE do I believe is deserving of having a title reign that hasn't already? And that's hard to say because everybody's had a title reign. I'm taking the World Heavyweight title out because that really waters everything down. And I'm talking the WWE Championship, right? Jey Uso, I know he's been world champ and just recently lost it. But I'm not going to count that because I'm talking WWE champion. He deserves a reign, or I could buy it at least. I definitely think Sami Zayn could have a short run that would be exciting and actually hit you in the feels, because he's been around for so long and he's done so much with the company. Similar to Eddie Guerrero beating Brock Lesnar, came out of nowhere. No one pictured it, and yet it happened. And I could see something like that with Sami Zayn beating someone for the WWF champion. Imagine he's the one who beats Cena, or he beats whoever else and has a short reign as WWE champion. That would be awesome. And I'm just going to say right now, a future WWE champion, I believe, will be Braun Breaker at some point. I believe he will, as a face, be the WWE champion at some point, and hold the belt for an extended period of time, or, you know, just be one of these champions that has it for a few months, loses it, someone else has it, and then he gets it back, and they kind of play hot potato with the belt between maybe him, Cody Rhodes, one of the Usos, Gunther, like sometimes kind of similar to what they did in the early 2000s with Kurt Angle, The Rock, Triple H, Undertaker, Austin. Like any one of these guys could have had the belt then. It might be something like that when Braun Breaker becomes a true contender. Well, that's my list of 5 potential WWF champions from the Golden Era. Comment, tell me if you agree, disagree. Who did I leave out? I bet you a lot of you are going to say Scott Hall. I didn't put him on the list, but feel free, share your thoughts. Let me know who belongs on the list. Who do you think is going to be a future WWE champion, not world champion? I put that just a step below. Right above IC champion, but below WWE champion. I say Braun Breaker. I could buy Sami Zayn. I can buy Jey Uso. But who do you think? Put in the comments. And until next time, see you then.